Good evening, Sunday evening. Welcome, Graham Chalmers, co-host of Two Big Egos in a Small Car. Sunday night, early March, mid-March, marching on. And
Get away from Leeds United, for God's sake, Charles.
I deliberately was avoiding that, and we continue to avoid that. The year is kind of gaining momentum, but I kind of still feel the biggies are around the corner still, and not
Yeah,
least,
we're in the
not
waiting room to life happening.
I slightly feel that at the moment.
Mm.
I'm looking forward very much to Emma Rice's company, Wise Children, doing their world premiere of North by Northwest, Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest at York Theatre Royal. That's kind of the
That'll be
first big
good.
landmark of the production of the year
Yeah,
in
yeah.
New York. Um,
Excellent.
and of course, coming up after that, Gary Oldman and doing Crap's last tape. So, but I slightly feel we're in maybe in a waiting pattern at the moment for things to really, really kick off. So things are ticking over, but that's not quite enough. Can
We're in the
you?
gap between Ski Sunday and the FA Cup final.
I think that's true. Can you in any way excite me right now as to why I should want to continue this podcast tonight?
Well, there's loads of great gigs coming up. In the next month or so, I'm seeing the Murder Capital from Dublin,
Yeah,
Kamasi Washington, the American jazz guy, and Tangerine Dream. I mean, that's an
you're seeing
exciting mix.
Tangerine Dream.
Yeah, Manchester Aviva Factory International, that new venue that
Oh
opened
yeah,
last
yeah,
year.
yeah. So how many of
Was that
Tangerine Dream are still the original Dreamers?
0.0? Basically, when the last remaining member was alive, he authorized these three people to be Tangerine Dream. So, although they're
It's
not Tangerine Dream,
extraordinary.
they are Tangerine Dream.
I find that I just, I mean, obviously it's not a tribute act, but I just still find that odd.
Well, they're electronic, so it's easier, I suppose, to pass the baton on to your like younger version of yourselves when it's
Hmm.
electronic than if it's a bass player, a guitarist, a double bass player, a trumpet player. You know,
Hmm.
it's easy. So for example, like I'm sure that I mean Kraftwerk aren't really totally Kraftwerk anymore,
No,
and
no.
they're still playing gigs.
I mean, I'm interested as to why you would want to go and see three people who aren't Tangerine Dream being Tangerine Dream.
For the very reason that because it is electronic, it will probably sound exactly the same as it would have sounded in 1973.
Well, that's as direct as answer as I could get on that. Anyways, well, we look forward to hearing what your version, your feelings are about that. And again, as I say, the year has really yet to catch fire. You've not yet convinced me.
Okay, well, let's move on quickly. We're getting bogged down in negativity.
Yeah, let's be positive. Graham, there is, and I've been, of course, typically, I haven't yet seen this film. I am going to go and see this film this week. This is Steven Soderbergh's new spy com film, Black Bag. Part of the attraction of it is that Cate Blanchett, or Cate Blanchett, however you want to pronounce her name,
Blanchett, Blanchett.
and Michael Fassbender are the leads in this film. Always, I mean, the quality with Soderbergh's casts strong anyway, but you have seen this. So rather than me just speculating, a black bag, an object that not normally induces a great sense of excitement, I guess, except perhaps when it's the black bag named after Jane Birkin. Maybe that was an exciting black bag. But what should we make of this film? Because Soderbergh's work, uh, hit and miss, I think it's fair to say.
Well, yes, since 1989, Six Lines of Videotape was a big hit,
Yeah,
which I think we saw at International Film
we
Festival
did. We did.
at the time. Since that was a big hit, he's up and down like a yo-yo. He basically
Mm,
tries out lots of different types of films,
yeah.
and sometimes it works really well, and other times it just doesn't work at all. And he's quite, although he's quite a low-key guy, he's quite a brave filmmaker.
Mm. So this time, I mean, let's look at this film first, and then we'll look at where it stands in his canon of work, and in particular in relation to one film that you want to draw attention to. What are the merits of this film, firstly?
Well, Black Bag, to boil it down to its basics, is if someone had watched and enjoyed Mr. and Mrs. Smith with Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie about
Yes.
the husband and wife spy couple who are also very good at killing people, if someone had enjoyed that film but thought, if I could just make it a bit more English, and a bit more Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, I'd have a great film. And that's exactly what Black Bag is. It's set mainly in Britain. There's a little scene in Zurich, and that's about it. It's a very
Yeah.
British film, even though he's an American director. And it basically is like a cross between Mr. and Mrs. Smith and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Mm.
And it's a nice little film, but I would say the words little film is the most
Are we talking
important part of
chamber
that
scale?
sentence.
Are we talking a kind of chamber scale film?
It's an ensemble piece with a good supporting cast, including Tom Burke and Pierce Brosnan and Naomi Harris. But it's definitely a chamber piece
Mm.
about the intrigues between a group of spies based in London.
Um, delighted to hear Pierce Brosnan doing a role. Tell me what he does in this. I mean, I'm not saying he gets to the stage where Roger Moore kind of sends himself up to the umpteenth degree in the last sort of films that he would do in his career. How straight is Pierce Brosnan playing it here?
Pretty straight. There's not much ham there. I think the one of the problems with the film, and it's not a brilliant film, although it's quite a good film,
Mm.
is Fassbender and Blanchett, in the sense that they do. It's hard to say they're overacting because they're not expressing many emotions because they
Mm.
are spies. So, they're supposed to have poker faces, but they're a bit too big as stars for the story. And it is a good story. It's good narrative.
So, I mean, it's inevitable, though, given that it's Steven Soderbergh, that he will have stars in the roles. I mean, that surely can't be helped. I mean, you wouldn't get Hitchcock not casting stars.
No, but put it this way, if Tom Burke and even Naomi Harris
Mm.
had played the main couple, the spy couple, played by Fassbender and Blanchett,
Yeah.
it would have been a better film because
Mm.
it's a good script, good narrative twists. It keep holds your attention,
Mm.
but Fassbender and Blanchett throughout the film remain Fassbender and Blanchett. They're clearly stars, and the film needed to have the key roles played by people who weren't stars. But of course, then he wouldn't have got the money to make the film, so
Yeah, exactly.
he had to have stars, like you said.
In terms of their chemistry between the two of them, I mean, you mentioned Mr. and Mrs. Smith, where the chemistry was a hugely part of why that film was a hit. What about the
Hmm.
chemistry here between these two?
Well, Soderbergh's best films, like Traffic or Ocean's 11, Erin Brockovich,
Yeah.
even Behind the Candelabra,
Mm.
are when he casts the right people in the key roles. There's other films like Solaris with George Clooney, The Good German with
Yeah.
George Clooney again and Cate
Mm.
Blanchett,
Mm.
and Contagion with Matt Damon. They aren't as good because they, even though the cast is a good cast, the key roles aren't played by the right people. Because as you know, in films or anything else involving fiction, it isn't a good, it's not enough to be a good actor. You have to be the right actor for the role. You
Yeah.
have to suit that role. And I don't think the chemistry between Fassbender and Blanchett, despite their best efforts, is actually there. They just come across as two stars trying their best to act next to each other. That's the
Mm.
feeling I get. And it doesn't ruin the film, but it stops it being a great film because you can never totally buy them. You don't totally believe in the story, even though it's a good one, because you can't stop thinking this is just Michael Fassbender and this
Mm.
is just Cate Blanchett.
I mean, that is a fault line, isn't it? If the stars don't align, as it were.
It's the sort of film that if you watched it on television, you think that was a good film.
Mm.
And it is a good film, but it's not one of his best films. It's not a failure. It's definitely worth seeing, but it's not one of his best films, and it's mainly down to the central casting.
Now
Fassbender and Blanchett are both strong personalities, and
mm.
their faces both speak volumes, which normally in an acting role is great news because you
Yeah.
want to be able to
Yeah,
see
of
what they're
course.
feeling. But when you're playing spies, you need to be low key. These are people
Yeah.
who, for a living, keep things close to the chest. So you need to be low key, and I don't think Fassbender or Blanchett can do low key.
Whereas Alec Guinness could.
Yeah, he wasn't really a star. He was a character actor who was famous, but a bit like Gene Hackman. Gene Hackman, despite the fact he was brilliant, the late Gene Hackman,
Yeah.
wasn't actually a star. He was a famous character actor.
Yeah. That's an interesting distinction, isn't it? And from what you're saying here, that would have suited it more as a piece.
Mm-mm.
Now you
But
make
it's good story, and it begins and ends. It's bookended by a key confrontation scene
mm,
round a dining table at home with a spy couple at the beginning and the end, and that's
yeah.
a neat way of doing things. So it's quite an intimate film. You know, it's good characterization, good acting. So it's got a lot of strengths, but again, it's just the central pair I don't think are quite right for the film.
I was mocking the title at the start, but tell me, what is the significance of the black bag?
A black bag job, I think, and I haven't actually researched this. It's a spy job that even spies can't talk about, and it usually involves death, someone getting killed.
That would make sense. The word black there. Yes.
Mm.
Now, you've in the notes for our recording tonight made the suggestion that, for example, I mean, it does by comparison with the Limey.
Mm.
This is the 1999 film starring Terence Stamp and Peter Fonda. So we're talking two huge stars working together in the
Yeah.
film there. So why do you feel that the Limey actually is a superior piece of work?
Well, first of all, it's a neo-noir film. It's indebted
Yeah.
to things like The Big Sleep and The Long Goodbye.
Mm,
It's indebted to John Boorman's Point Blank, Lee Marvin 1967. It's indebted to Performance,
yeah.
Donald Cammell, Nick Rogue's film with Mick
Yeah.
Jagger and James Fox in 1970. So
Mm,
it's quite an unpromising idea. Terence Stamp is a London criminal who's just got a long stretch in jail,
mm,
and he flies across to LA to find out what's happened to his missing daughter. And it turns out she got embroiled in a world of 60s pop producers in LA and the mob. And
mm.
the main 60s pop producer is played by Peter Fonda.
Fonda, yeah.
So on paper, this could easily be a cliched, uninspiring film,
Mm,
but it isn't. And the reason it isn't is partly that the characterization is good, which you've got in Black Bag, but it's
yeah.
also because the dialogue is brilliant in the Limey. It's really well written. There's
Mm,
memorable scenes where the characters are saying lines that you remember afterwards. On top of that, you've got interesting direction. Soderbergh decides in the editing stages to make it full of flashbacks and flash forwards. He plays with time backwards and forwards the whole time, and it makes for a really interesting collage, which is
mm,
influenced by Point Blank and Performance, but it really works. But the final reason it really works is because Terence Stamp is perfect for the role, and Peter Fonda is so good as a 60s pop producer who's still wealthy and popular.
mm.
He's like charming and smooth and sort of likable, but he's slippery as hell. And
Yeah.
he's a bit of a sleazeball on the quiet. And it's a brilliant performance. And the film uses the settings in LA and then later on in Big Sur up the Californian Route 1 that we
Oh, yeah.
drove once a long time ago
Indeed, we
together
did. Yeah.
absolutely brilliantly. So it's one of those films where absolutely everything about it is right. There isn't a single weak link in the chain. And even though everything's right, if Terence Stamp wasn't playing that role and Peter Fonda wasn't playing the other role, it
Mm,
still wouldn't be as good. So if for example, if you had Michael Fassbender playing
yeah.
the Terence Stamp role
Yeah.
and maybe who else could it be? Matt Damon playing the
Mm,
Peter Fonda role, the film wouldn't be half as good. So that's how you know that the actual casting of film is key, because it's without the casting being correct, all the other brilliant pieces of a film start to fall apart.
yes. So Black Bag, it's what, 3 stars?
I'd say 3.5 because it's a
Okay.
good script, good
Mm.
story.
I always wonder what half a star looks like.
Well, if you go at night time and the clouds part, you
Yeah.
sometimes see
You
half a
sometimes
star.
see half a star. Yeah. Yeah. So
But the dialogue in the Limey is so good. The Limey is a really underrated film. I
yeah.
think it's one of the best noir films ever made, and I think it's
I'll have to dig it
possibly
out.
Soderbergh's best
Mm,
film.
I'll have to dig it
And
out again.
there's a great bit
Mm,
where Terry Valentine, who's the Peter Fonda character, the 60s
yes.
pop producer, and the film's like a fractured mirror where you see everything from different angles, different points of the film. And
Mm,
it's really about lots of things. It's about regrets and guilt, but it's also about how unreliable your own memory is, how different people see things from different point of views. And it's
yeah.
also about the 60s and whether the 60s were real or whether the 60s were just a myth and they weren't really special at all. And there's a great bit where Peter Fonda's character is talking to his young girlfriend, very young
Mm,
girlfriend, and she's
mm,
asking about the 60s and how great it must have been. And this is what Peter Fonda says back to her. He says, "This is what the 60s were like." He says, "Did you ever dream about a place you never really recall being to before? A place that maybe only exists in your imagination,
yeah.
some place far away, half remembered when you wake up. When you were there, though, you knew the language, you knew your way around.
Mm.
That was the 60s." Then he pauses and said, "No, it wasn't that either. It was just 1966 and early 67. That's all there was." And it sums up what the 60s was really like
Yeah.
in a few lines here and there. Really brilliant. It's a really
Mm.
smart script by Lem Dobbs, who's an English
Yeah.
writer, by the way. And
Yes.
his most recent work was he partly wrote the screenplay for Lee, about the
Oh, did
photographer
he?
Lee Miller,
Right.
played by Kate
Yeah.
Winslet. So
Yes.
he doesn't do many films, Lem Dobbs, but when he does, he contributes really great dialogue.
What do they say, that cliched line? If you remember the '60s, you weren't really there. So that's all a part of the myth. I mean, I if I talk to my parents in the past about what do they do in the '60s, they didn't have a '60s experience in the '60s at all, and
Yeah.
they will not have been alone in that.
No, no. I know what you mean because the 60s was really London. And it
Mm,
wasn't just London people doing it. There was people from Edinburgh and America who were at the same
yeah,
time, like Joe Boyd from
yeah.
America and Jim Haynes from Edinburgh, who was also from America in the first place. So it's
Mm,
not that it was a English-based thing, but it was a London-based thing for
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
But it did spread out eventually because I remember, like, as a kid growing up in Grangemouth, which is very much not London,
Not
very far from London. And in about 72, there was a big rock music festival at Grangemouth Stadium.
Mm,
And I was too young to go to it. And I didn't know most of the bands anyway, even though they were quite famous in 72. But I
mm,
remember as a kid walking to the stadium and trying to look through the fence to see what was going on.
yeah.
And I remember being a short young person looking at all these tall older people walking past with flared trousers and long hair,
Mm.
and me thinking, God, they all look weird but super cool. So it did spread out. The 60s
Yeah.
did fan out, but it took its time.
I mean, it's fair to say that probably no era has been mythologized in the way that the 1960s has, to the extent that the 1960s has.
You got the Roaring Twenties, which is a bit mythologized,
Yeah, but
all the flappers and
not on the
jazz.
scale of the '60s though.
No,
And
but apart from that,
people,
you're right.
yeah, because people tend to
Yeah,
merge
60s.
they tend to merge the '20s and the '30s, not because war came along or whatever, but there's something that, and it's really interesting that a film should challenge that, and as eloquently as the quote that you gave on that. So if we're thinking about sometimes things are better sometimes in memory than they were in reality, um, maybe even I'm going to suggest that sometimes Glastonbury is perhaps the most overrated thing that goes on in this country. Um, and so
I think,
I look at the headliners this year, and well, all part of my lack. Where's the fizz this year? That's all part of it right now. When you hear those headliners, which you can
yeah,
name
that's
to us,
true. But
Graham, just run through who our headliners are.
well, saying that you don't like the headlines at Glastonbury is a bit like me every single year saying Leeds Festival hasn't got a great lineup.
Mm.
And yet, when I look back at Leeds Festival lineups of 10 years ago or even 20 years ago, I go, "Ooh, that was a good lineup." So it's sort of like a habit of like saying that it's not as good as it was. But I have to say that when I see the lineup, like the headliners Neil Young, who I saw at Hyde Park in London 2019, and he
Mm.
sounded good, but he looked like an old bloke in a
Mm.
check shirt.
Mm.
Olivia Rodrigo, who I couldn't care less about, in the 1975, who, for a modern pop band, are an interesting band, but they're not. I don't think they're a great band, but when I see that lineup, it makes me think, good grief, Glastonbury is running out of big headline names to actually put on, which may be true because the rock music scene now doesn't sell
No,
loads of
I mean the
records, doesn't get
1975 were
billions of
probably always
streams.
going to, where they were probably always going to have their moment in the sun. But I would say I prefer bands from 1975 to the 1975.
Yeah, but I think there's a problem with Glastonbury because what really sells tickets these days to the masses is the sort of stuff that dominates the streaming world.
Mm.
And none of that stuff is suitable
No.
for festivals because the people that stream that sort of music don't need to go to music festivals. It's not their sort of thing because the music festival comes from the 60s. It was a 60s invention
Yeah.
and it retains in its DNA a little bit of the rock music world. Without some rock music connection, your general festival at Glastonbury has ends up having no purpose. So at some point in the future, they need some new headline acts who are younger, but who still have mass appeal, who aren't R&B based or disco pop based. And I don't know where that's going to come from. I don't know how that's going to happen, that process.
I think there's problems to come up with that. I mean, we've said before that short of Coldplay being invited back every single year to headline, or maybe Radiohead being invited to headline, it's hard to think of whom. I mean, it just is. It's not the production line of great, and I mean British artists to headline, isn't there. It just isn't there, and that's not me romanticizing the past. I might have made a flippant comment about preferring bands from 1975, but I just don't think that's not the pop world produces, and we've said why with streaming, but the rock world is the one that isn't producing. It just is not producing acts of that scale. It just does not do it anymore.
Despite the fact the critics and BBC Music want Fontaines DC to be a huge band, and I like Fontaines DC a lot. They're not a huge band.
No. Nor are Idols. Nor are Idols.
Yeah.
They're not on a scale. Yeah. They're not.
And you got to ask the question: how come Adele's never headlined Glastonbury? Because she's British and huge, and Ed Sheeran hasn't either. There's something about the huge global pop superstars that in general resist Glastonbury. Apart from, ironically, American ones are more prone to headline Glastonbury than the British ones for some reason.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's some surprise maybe that Oasis have resisted Glastonbury, but maybe they want it to be entirely their focus on their tour and be utterly in control of everything rather than being part of a huge event where they're just part of it. But I still think it's something of a surprise and maybe a missed opportunity from that point of view. But even then, that's retrospective. We're talking about a band who's getting together, getting back together.
Years old.
Not a band who's progressing to being suddenly at their peak now, and so they've now graduated to being Glastonbury headline status. No, it would be the All Our Yesterdays kind of gig.
Yeah, but Glastonbury Festival is a lot more than headliners. I mean, It's got a million stages for kickoff, and it also represents lots of different alternative cultures, with a slight political edge as well. And so the whole festival is way bigger than the headliners. But I suppose the problem is that, because I would favour they went back to building up the main stage around interesting acts rather than around name acts. But I suppose to sell tickets.
Partly, I mean, the way the BBC presents the event, that it's all about the star names, that actually, and I'm not wanting to blame people want to blame the BBC for everything these days, but I do wonder if in some ways there's a bit of a tunnel vision about how Glastonbury is presented. And actually what you've said is key to Glastonbury. It is so diverse. There are so many different stages and all forms of music feature in that. And people who enjoy Glastonbury overall, it's not really about headline acts. It's about the whole experience. And I'm not sure that the BBC feels that that's necessarily its job. I think its job is to it seems to be to give 3 or 4 songs from the day before, which are always the well-known hits, not maybe an interesting new development that a band has done. And then of course we have the late night headline acts shown in full. I'm not convinced that's the best way to represent Glastonbury.
Yeah, but the BBC is only doing what Glastonbury Festival does itself when it comes to picking headliners. They both feel obliged to go for the biggest audience possible, which means you have to focus on certain names to get the biggest possible audience. And I think the problem with Glastonbury is that it became so popular because if you remember, 25, 30 years ago, this wasn't the case.
Absolutely.
It had a smaller crowd. It wasn't as big. And consequently, it was more free in who it picked to be in the main stage. I think it's because of its huge success and the huge costs of running such a festival these days, it has to be tied to the big names. Just like the BBC, to justify the money it spends on covering it, has to show popular names. So I think it's situation that it's going to be hard to get out of because they're almost like a prisoner of their own success.
I mean, they've got a fallow year next year. It's no Glastonbury next year to let the land recover. That's to recover from the lack of exciting headliners, perhaps. But anyway, we'll see how Glastonbury goes this year. And I mean, I don't want to be knocking Neil Young, one of my favourite artists, but I'm not sure. You know, Neil Young headlining can't see that.
How many hits has Neil Young had in Britain? How many
Very few.
songs could Neil
Very
Young
few.
sing, which your average person would have heard of? Hardly any.
We're talking a handful, if that.
Yeah, if that, yeah. And also, he's not fun. There's not gonna be much laughs at Neil Young performance. He's quite an
No.
intense character.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Graham, we move on from Glastonbury to a recollection of how an inquiry from Fibbers owner Tim Hornsby led to uncovering Graham's magazine, Charm Magazine's spat, as you call it, in print with the early Kaiser Chiefs. Now, you have a bit of history of spats with different things, which is fine. I like the fact, I think journalists should be edgy where possible. I don't think there's any harm in upsetting people sometimes with a question. You're entitled to ask questions. If people are prickly in response, fine. That's probably their issue, not yours. And I'd hate actually journalism to be neutered into not doing that, which is my long-winded way of saying, how did you manage to engineer a spat with early Kaiser Chiefs?
Well, this all came about because Tim Hornsby, who I've not seen for years, and you remember him well because he ran Fibbers, brilliant venue in York in the 90s, then the early noughties, in the days when it was mobbed, full of great bands, full of great local bands. Shed 7 hung around there. The Battle of Bands competition I had every year was epic. And you and me used to be judges occasionally. And when it got to the final, you'd have like Rick Witter or Alan Leach there from Shed 7 on the judging panel. It was, in retrospect, I remember at the time thinking Fibbers is good. In retrospect, Fibbers was absolutely brilliant. There's nothing like it now.
No, Tim's still putting together his book about Fibbers, and I do hope that actually does come to fruition because he's a great storyteller.
That's why he got in touch, because he wanted to know about a few York bands, and he said by Facebook Messenger, "Did you write about them in Charm?" And I said, "Well, I'll have a look." And so I had a look. I discovered, well, there's plenty of York bands in Charm over the 4 years that between 1997 and 2000. Plenty, but I found Santos in the issue of May 1998. In that issue, when I was looking at this old issue, which I haven't looked at for a long time, for Tim, who helped make Fibbers great. Part of the reason Fibbers was full of life is because Tim was full of life. Tim wasn't your quiet, understated Svengali figure in the shadows.
He was not.
He was front and center in Fibbers, which helped it be a lively place.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I found in the letters section of Charm, and I was pleased that it did have a letter section because I've forgotten that. And it was a letter from the early version of Kaiser Chiefs. And this is from May 1998.
Yeah.
And I think they had their first hit about 2003, 2004.
Yeah.
And if I read it to you, it's from Lunston Parva, as they were called then. And I think it's from Nick Hodgson. And it says, "First of all, I would like to know what a hook is. I get the feeling that whatever it is, it must be very important. And the Parvas haven't got any distinctive ones. What are we doing wrong, Graham? Secondly, what is the Fen Street Gang? It sounds like something us 60s throwbacks must get into and rip it off for everything it's worth. Thirdly, why does Ricky Wilson's blonde feather cut deserve a mention? Fourthly, how is it that February's edition of Charm stated that Runston Parva were strangely original and said something about a hook revolution, and then in last month's Charm, we had lost all our originality and distinctive hooks. If this means we are the subject of a Charm backlash, then we are all very flattered." That's what Runston Parva, who then became Parva,
gravitated
then
into
Kaiser
being
Chiefs, wrote to Charm for the May 1990 edition. So
did you answer the letter?
Oh yeah.
Oh, excellent. I'd love to hear what you said back.
This is what I said back. "Sorry to Runston Parva. The second review of your band was a personal opinion, not company policy. We wouldn't know what a Charm backlash was, and we don't want to either. The Fen Street Gang is what happened to the 60s sitcom Please Sir when the longer-haired 70s kicked in. think a glam rock Bash Street Gang. When it comes to getting a number of people in the it goes on to discuss all things. That was the end of the bit about
Mm.
Kaiser Chiefs or Runston Parva. So I answered the questions, but
Yeah.
I didn't feel I did anything wrong because Charm didn't have a company policy.
No,
The
exactly.
idea that
Exactly.
Charm would do a backlash would be ridiculous. It was a different reviewer. So one person would have reviewed them in February
Yeah.
1998, and someone else would have reviewed them for May. And it was just they didn't agree entirely on the
And
band,
that's
which
fine.
I think is
Absolutely.
totally fine.
Absolutely. That's exactly how it should be.
Exactly. But the funny thing is that I the same year, the year after, I was a judge
Mm.
in the semi-finals of Leeds Battle of
Oh,
bands
yeah.
held in the basement club of O2 Academy.
Yeah.
And it was semi-finals. I was a judging panel, and Runston Paver were in the semi-finals. and I didn't vote for them because I didn't think they had any good songs. They were quite a good band, but the songs weren't very good. So they didn't get through to the final. So so
Really?
I didn't mean I
Mm.
never meant to follow up with what became the Kaiser Chiefs, but
No.
I was going to write fawning reviews
Yeah.
just to
Graham,
keep in with people.
I predict a riot.
Exactly, yeah.
Did it happen?
No, they were very nice people. We used to bump into me and James Littlewood, who's a huge part of Charm. He was assistant editor. We used to
Mm.
bump into Ricky Wilson, Nick Hodgson, quite a few times at gigs
Yeah.
and Leeds before they got anywhere near being big.
Mm.
And they were really nice chaps. Everybody liked them as people. It's just they weren't really rated as a band
No.
because until they became Kaiser Chiefs, they weren't actually that great. And this
Mm.
wasn't just me saying this, this was Leeds as a whole. But they were thoroughly nice guys, which obviously they still are.
Absolutely. Now, the Grant McPhee has written his book on Scottish indie bands, Postcards from Scotland, and probably, Graham, it would be fair to say you would have more affection for those bands than you might for Kaiser Chiefs music. And you're going to delight us with a short but funny extract from Grant McPhee's book called Postcards from Scotland, partly because there was the postcard label, which I guess lent itself to this. Far away with this extract, Graham, if you could
Well,
find it.
it was published last year by Omnibus Press called Postcards from Scotland,
Hmm.
Scottish Independent Music, 1983 to 1995 by Grant McPhee. And it's a great book because it's totally human. It's all the band's own words, and you learn so much about what it's like to be in a band, trying to make it or even semi-make it and being successful. It's just delightfully honest and down to earth and
Hmm.
accidentally very funny as well. And I've put on loads of gigs over the years, and to promote gigs, you need to as well as being hardworking and have good taste, and you have to be very hardworking. You
Hmm.
also need to you have to pull strings a bit, and you have to be a little bit of a chancer because it's quite a difficult area to be successful in. And
Absolutely.
I never go too far on this regard, but I have pulled some strokes to get bands to play.
Hmm.
And maybe if I pulled more strokes, I would have been Harvey Goldsmith, but I've got a limit. Whereas the really successful ones, like Alan McGee,
Yeah.
who formed Creation Records, he seemed to have no no limits to which he wouldn't go to
Hmm.
create something in the live music scene, then record company. Anyway, in the 90s, this Glasgow band called AC Acoustics, and they were pretty good. Didn't quite make it big,
No.
and they got good gigs straight away. And this is what their bass player says. He says, "We got the initial early gigs mostly by lying. We'd phone the agents and tell them the venue wanted us on the bill, then phone the venue and tell them that the agent wanted us on the bill. By the time they spoke, they both thought we were on the bill. At one point, I phoned Spaceman Three's manager in London and convinced him we were possessed of a huge and growing following in Glasgow. And he told me that if the promoter was happy, he was happy. I then phoned the promoter and told him that Spaceman 3 were huge fans and we'd been contacted by their manager and asked if we would support them. He told me that if they were happy, he was happy. With zero following, we supported Spaceman 3 and played to the best part of 1,000 people in one of our first gigs.
Now
So that is just absolutely
yeah.
brilliant.
I mean, I admire the cheek of that.
Mm. Well, how are you going to get anywhere at the
Of
bottom
course.
if you're going to play it by
Of
the
course.
rules when you know nowhere? How are you going to get anything done?
I mean, from your point of view, when you came to promoting gigs, it does require an instinct not actually just with the headline act, but with a support act, which is often more difficult. I actually think that sometimes to choose who should be a support act, which is a convention, is difficult to judge. And ideally, you do want to give a new band a chance. But you've also got to think, well, actually, is this going to put, is this are they crap? Are they going to ruin the atmosphere before the big band comes on? It's an interesting choice, that thing of how you put together a bill that you are confident will post, let's say, two acts that they would complement each other. I mean, I happened to go to see Joy Division supporting Buzzcocks, which, I mean, you can't, that, of course, in hindsight, what a lineup that was in Sheffield that I did that in beginning of 1980 that was. But how do you judge putting together a bill?
My first thought in any event I organize, whether it's a talk or a gig or whatever, is do I like these bands?
Mm,
So the first thought is taste and
yes.
quality. My
Mm,
second thought is okay, I like these bands, or I like that guest speaker, or I like the idea of the event, but can I get an audience? Is this
mm,
going to pull a crowd?
mm,
Am I going to possibly cover my expenses or not? How much money could I possibly lose if it goes wrong? And then I start thinking back from the acts I want or the people I want, and I
mm,
think, okay, as a bill, will this pull a crowd? How much money is this going to cost me?
yeah.
And I will tweak what I want to do to fit those parameters because there's no point in having the best band in the world on and losing a fortune and getting no crowd. There's no point in having a support band that aren't very good
Yeah.
just because they're popular. So I've never booked support band just because we're popular.
No.
But at the same time, you don't want to book a support band that's going to bring nobody at all
Mm,
unless you love them, which I have done. If I really love a band,
mm,
I will just do it and accept the consequences. So I booked Wild Beasts for the Blues Bar, which holds about 60 people
yeah.
in about 2007, 2008, just before they signed to Domino, not knowing who they were because I saw them in Leeds at the Broodnell,
Yeah.
and I absolutely loved them. And I said to the lead singer, I think it was Hayden Thorpe, afterwards, I said,
Yeah.
if I can think of a way of getting a crowd for you in Harrogate, would you come and play Harrogate?
You've been listening to the podcast Two Big Egos in a Small Car. Your hosts were Graham Chalmers and Charles Hutchinson. This was a Baltic sub production.